In 2002, a chilling discovery was made deep within an underwater cave in Croatia. Divers found the body of MK, a diver who had gone missing during an exploration with friends. His lifeless form was discovered 54 meters, 177 feet, beneath the surface, alone in the dark, cold depths of the cave. At first glance, the scene appeared to be a brutal murder. MK's diving mask was missing, and there was a 30-centimeter, 12-inch knife lodged deep into his chest. The authorities immediately launched an investigation, suspecting foul play. The initial theory was that one of MK's companions had killed him, stabbed him, and then discarded the body in the depths to cover their tracks. However, forensic analysis would soon uncover a much more harrowing truth than anyone could have imagined. The investigation into MK's death initially pointed to a possible crime, but the findings from the scene were more disturbing than any murder. It turned out that MK had not been the victim of an attack by another person, but rather, he had met his tragic end through the desperate, heart-wrenching actions of his own hand. MK had gone cave diving with friends, exploring the complex maze of submerged tunnels in the cave. Somewhere along the way, he became disoriented and lost within the winding passages. As time passed, his oxygen supply dwindled, and he was soon left gasping for air. Trapped in the depths of the cave with no way out, his situation became dire. His oxygen tank ran out completely, and the darkness of the cave became all the more suffocating. In his last moments, MK swam desperately, trying to find a source of air. He finally came across a small air pocket, trapped between two rocks. Exhausted and gasping, he tried to inhale the precious air from the bubble, but it wasn't enough to save him. The suffocating pain of drowning was unbearable, and the real horror began to unfold. In a final act of desperation, MK took the knife he had been carrying and, in a horrifying attempt to escape the excruciating agony of suffocation, stabbed himself in the chest. It wasn't an act of violence inflicted by someone else, but rather an attempt to end his suffering in the only way he could. The knife lodged deep into his chest, a tragic symbol of his final, desperate attempt to control his fate in the face of a relentless, inescapable death. MK's decision to end his own life in that moment of pure agony is a haunting reminder of the intense psychological and physical toll that drowning can have on a person. The unbearable pain of slowly losing consciousness from lack of air, coupled with the isolation of being trapped in a remote underwater cave, must have driven him to take the extreme measure of self-inflicted harm. His death was not the result of a violent altercation with others, but rather the horrific consequences of becoming lost in a perilous underwater labyrinth, where the struggle for life became a battle against time and breath. The discovery of MK's body and the circumstances surrounding his death sent shivers through the diving community, sparking conversations about the dangers of cave diving and the psychological challenges that divers can face in moments of extreme distress. It serves as a chilling reminder of the unforgiving nature of the deep, dark caves that exist beneath the surface of the earth, where even the most experienced adventurers can find themselves trapped, alone, and desperate. In the end, MK's tragic death was not a murder, but the result of a series of unforgiving circumstances that left him fighting for his life in the silent, suffocating depths. On a crisp, cold morning in October 2022, in the shadow of the towering Garhwal Himalayas, a group of climbers set out with the hope of summiting Draupadi Kadanda 2, DKD2, a daunting peak rising to 18,600 feet. But for some, that ambition would be their last, as an avalanche of unimaginable force swept through them, leaving devastation in its wake. Ankush Sharma, only 23 years old, was one of the climbers that morning. As part of an advanced mountaineering course with the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering, EM, Sharma was prepared for the challenges that lay ahead, though no one could have predicted the deadly force that would strike. The group had set off early, just after 3:30 a.m. from Camp 1, nestled at 15,800 feet. As the climbers ascended into the early darkness, their headlamps flickered like fireflies against the snow. The air was thin, and the temperature was dropping, but they pressed on. Among the climbers was Sunil Lalwani, a 28-year-old former marketing professional who had left the bustle of city life for the silence of the mountains. For him, climbing DKD2 wasn't just a challenge, it was a chance to test his limits. Deep Thakkar, also 28, was determined to reach the summit of DKD2, his first 5,000-meter peak. A fund manager by trade, Thakkar had relocated to Himachal Pradesh to pursue his passion for mountaineering. The summit beckoned, promising to make their dreams a reality. The weather that day was deceptively calm. Snow fell lightly in the early hours, a slight breeze that the climbers barely noticed. By the time they reached Rambo Rock at 16,800 feet, the team had clipped into their first fixed rope, making their way up through a rocky section, carefully avoiding cracks in the glacier below. As dawn's first light began to creep over the horizon, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. The group moved in tight formation, each climber following the other, ropes connecting them in a lifeline. Their progress was slow, but steady. The snow was deep, and the climb was grueling. But the summit came into view, a sight that filled Thakkar's heart with exhilaration. The final stretch lay ahead. At 8:30 a.m., Sharma reached the summit snowfield and unclipped himself from the fixed line. He was nearly there, just a few more steps. But then, without warning, disaster struck. A deep crack, almost imperceptible, ripped through the slope above them. It released a massive avalanche, cascading downward like a roaring beast. The avalanche moved with brutal force. What had been a hopeful ascent turned into a chaotic nightmare in an instant. Snow and ice tore down the mountainside, sweeping climbers off their feet. Thakkar, just below, could do nothing but watch in horror as his companions were taken by the slide. Lalwani, tangled in the snow, plunged his ice axe into the freezing slope, desperately trying to arrest the slide. But it was futile. The snow surged around him, and within moments he too was consumed by the wave of ice and snow. Sharma, nearing the summit, turned back in confusion. His world, once filled with hope, had gone eerily silent. The fixed ropes, their only connection to the others, were gone. His friends were gone. There was no sound, no cries for help, just the haunting silence of the mountain. What happened? Sharma would later reflect. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, and everything happened in silence. The avalanche, relentless and indiscriminate, tore through the climbers. The once calm and exhilarating climb turned into a desperate fight for survival. The mountain claimed more than just their dreams. It took lives, erasing them as if they had never been there at all. In the aftermath, rescue operations began, but the damage had already been done. The avalanche had stolen everything. Lives, aspirations, and the hope of a successful summit all vanished in an instant. The tragedy was felt not only by the climbers' families and loved ones, but by the mountaineering community itself, shaken by the raw power of nature and the unforgiving realities of high-altitude climbing. DKD2, though less notorious than its towering neighbors like Thalai Sagar and Meru, proved that no peak, no matter the height, was safe from the deadly forces of the Himalayas. This tragedy would serve as a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability, a warning that in the mountains, even the best laid plans can come undone in the blink of an eye. In the early hours of April 18, 2014, Mount Everest witnessed its deadliest accident to date, a tragedy that claimed the lives of 13 Sherpas, left 3 missing, and injured several others. The avalanche struck the Khumbu Icefall, a notoriously perilous stretch on the south side of the mountain, around 6:30 a.m. local time. It swept through the Popcorn Field, an area at approximately 19,000 feet, 5,800 meters, known for its massive ice blocks scattered like frozen debris. The Sherpas, integral to Everest expeditions, were ferrying equipment for climbers when disaster struck. The Khumbu Icefall has long been infamous among mountaineers. It's a chaotic, ever-shifting maze of towering seracs and crevasses, constantly reshaped by the mountain's movement. The avalanche originated from the west shoulder, where hanging glaciers loomed ominously above. These glaciers, precarious and unpredictable, are prone to collapse without warning, sending cascades of ice and snow barreling down the mountain. For the Sherpas caught in the avalanche, there was no escape. Every year, hundreds of climbers flock to Everest, drawn by the allure of summiting the world's highest peak. The Southeast Ridge route, first conquered in 1953 by Sir Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, remains the most popular path. For these climbers, many paying upwards of $50,000 for the chance to stand atop Everest, success relies heavily on the labor and expertise of Sherpas. These elite mountaineers, often unacknowledged by the broader climbing community, are the backbone of every expedition. For each client attempting the climb, at least 2 Sherpas work behind the scenes, carrying loads, setting up camps, and fixing ropes on the route. The Khumbu Icefall is arguably the most dangerous place in the climbing world according to many veteran mountaineers. You can sit at base camp and watch avalanches roar down over the route, terrifying everyone. To mitigate risks, climbers typically traverse the icefall at night, guided by headlamps when the ice is more stable. Between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., the temperatures are low, and the glaciers above are less likely to shed their loads. By daylight, as the sun warms the mountain, the ice begins to melt and crumble, increasing the likelihood of avalanches and collapses. The Sherpas, however, bear the brunt of these dangers. Their work demands repeated trips through the icefall, often carrying heavy loads to support the climbers who will follow in their footsteps. Sherpas take the biggest risks, said renowned climber Conrad Anker. They shoulder the real burden of climbing Mount Everest. Among those lost in the avalanche was Ang Kaji Sherpa, a seasoned climber and father of 6. Kaji's reputation as one of the strongest Sherpas on the mountain was well earned. In 2012, during the North Face National Geographic Everest expedition, Kaji became the first person that season to summit Everest, skillfully fixing ropes for the climbers who followed. Humble despite his achievements, Kaji returned to camp after his summit bid that year, greeted by applause. With a quiet smile, he simply said he wasn't that tired. Kaji's dedication to his team extended beyond his climbing prowess. On the same expedition, as the climbers reached the death zone, an altitude above 26,000 feet, 7,900 meters, where survival is a constant battle, Kaji ran tirelessly between tents, delivering hot bowls of soup to the weary team. His selflessness and strength made him a pillar of support, both literally and figuratively, on the unforgiving slopes of Everest. The avalanche that claimed Kaji and his fellow Sherpas exposed the harsh realities of mountaineering's reliance on these unsung heroes. While climbers often bask in the glory of reaching Everest's summit, it is the Sherpas who risk their lives repeatedly, carrying loads, ensuring safety, and navigating the mountain's most treacherous passages. Their sacrifices have made countless ascents possible, but the toll is immense. Afterwards, the climbing community was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the ethics of high-altitude expeditions. For many Sherpa families, the loss was not just personal but also economic. Sherpas often support entire households with the earnings from a single climbing season, making their work not only perilous but essential for their family's survival. The 2014 Khumbu Icefall avalanche stands as a reminder of the risks faced by those who make Everest's dreams a reality for others. For the Sherpas who lost their lives that day, including Ang Kaji, their courage and contributions remain etched into the history of the mountain. And for those who continue to climb Everest, the tragedy is a call to honor the lives and legacies of those who pay the ultimate price on its unforgiving slopes. In a tragic and haunting accident, 4 young people lost their lives in an abandoned mine shaft, which had transformed into a dangerous underground cave. The cave, once a mine shaft, had become an alluring and mysterious sight, hidden within the mountainside. But what seemed like an adventurous exploration quickly turned into a deadly tragedy. After years of water flowing from the cave, it had become a perilous location, especially with an underwater passage leading to an underground chamber. This was the scene of the fatal accident that would later earn the cave the grim nickname, the Cave of Death. The tragic events unfolded when a group of 5 friends, eager to explore, ventured into the cave. The allure of the dark, winding tunnel was irresistible, but as hours passed without word from the group, one of the friends became worried. When there was still no sign of the others, the concerned friend decided to leave and seek help. By then, it was too late. The others had already drowned. Inside, one of the rescuers says it looked like the foursome had possibly drowned in a section of the mine that required them to go underwater. Upon receiving the emergency call, rescue crews rushed to the scene in Provo, Utah, and quickly set up a plan to save the trapped individuals. The mine, with its underground passage and murky waters, posed serious risks to the rescuers. Teams worked together to pump air into the cave while simultaneously pumping out water to reach the victims. The efforts bore fruit when, after several hours of intense work, rescuers were able to recover the body of one of the young women. Following this, they successfully extracted the other 3 victims from the cave. Unfortunately, by the time they reached them, it was too late for all 4. According to one of the rescuers, the victims had most likely drowned in a section of the mine that required them to pass through an underwater passage, which ultimately sealed their fate. The cave, which had once drawn adventurers and curious explorers, now became a chilling reminder of the immense danger hidden beneath the surface. Once the recovery efforts were complete, officials made the decision to seal the entrance to the cave, effectively ending its dangerous allure. The tragic drowning served as a sobering reminder of the risks associated with underground exploration, especially in caves and mine shafts, where the waters can be deceivingly treacherous. Jennifer Gilbraith's family knew she had a passion for adventure, but they never imagined that her love for fun would end in tragedy. Her father's first thought was that Jennifer had always dreamed of being famous. She had a deep love for music and played bass guitar, even performing in a band. Tragically, all the victims who perished in the cavern that morning were members of that very band. Since then, locals have referred to it as the Cave of Death, and the memory of the 4 young lives lost in such a tragic way continues to haunt those who remember the incident. Mount Everest, the ultimate test of human endurance, has claimed many lives, but few stories are as haunting as that of Hannelore Schmatz. A passionate and skilled mountaineer, she made history as the 4th woman to reach the summit of Everest, but she also became the first woman and the first German citizen to die on its unforgiving slopes. Born in Germany in 1940, Hannelore grew up with an adventurous spirit. She shared her love for the mountains with her husband, Gerhard Schmatz, an experienced climber. Together, they embarked on daring expeditions around the world, conquering peaks in the Alps, the Andes, and the Himalayas. But Everest remained the ultimate prize, a goal that, in 1979, they set out to achieve. At 29,032 feet, 8,849 meters, Everest is a formidable challenge for even the most experienced climbers. The journey to the summit requires navigating the infamous Death Zone, an altitude above 26,000 feet, 8,000 meters, where oxygen levels are dangerously low and the human body begins to shut down. With a fatality rate of around 6.5%, the mountain is ruthless to those who underestimate its dangers. In the fall of 1979, Hannelore and Gerhard joined an expedition team of 13 members, 8 climbers and 5 Sherpas. Among them were Swiss-American Ray Genet, New Zealander Nick Banks, and Germans Tilman Fischbach and Hermann Worth. The group faced extreme weather conditions, including a prolonged blizzard, but they remained determined to push forward. The expedition split into 2 teams at Camp 3. On October 1st, Gerhard led the first group to the summit, making history as the oldest person to reach the top at age 50. His team successfully descended to Camp 2 the next day. Meanwhile, Hannelore's group set off at dawn on October 2nd, despite worsening weather. Gerhard, speaking via walkie-talkie, warned her to reconsider, but she pressed on. By early afternoon, she and her teammates reached the peak. It was a moment of triumph, but also the beginning of a catastrophe. The descent turned deadly. Exhaustion and brutal conditions drained Hannelore's strength. Janet ran out of oxygen, and as darkness fell, both climbers were too weak to continue. Against the warnings of their Sherpa guides, they made the fateful decision to bivouac at 28,000 feet, 8,500 meters. It was a lethal mistake. As temperatures plummeted and winds howled, the freezing night took its toll. By morning, Janae had succumbed to hypothermia. Sungdair's Sherpa, who had stayed behind with them, tried to help Hannelore down, but she was barely conscious, just 330 feet, 100 meters above Camp 4. She collapsed. Her last words were a desperate whisper, "Water, water," before she succumbed to the mountain's grip. She was only 39. Sungdair, frostbitten and barely alive, managed to reach a rescue team. He survived but lost most of his fingers and toes. For years, Hannelore's body remained a chilling landmark on Everest's southern route, frozen in a seated position against her backpack. Her eyes wide open, her hair whipped by the wind, she became a spectral presence on the mountain. Climbers described her as a sinister guard, a stark reminder of Everest's unforgiving nature. While Janet's body was eventually buried by snowfall, Hannelore's remained visible until 1984, when the mountain finally claimed her. Strong winds swept her remains over the Kangshung face, and she was lost from sight forever. Even today, over 200 bodies remain on Everest, silent witnesses to the mountain's relentless power. Gerhard, who survived the expedition, later reflected on his wife's fate. The team came home, but I alone, without my beloved Hannelore. Her legacy endures, a testament to both the triumphs and the tragedies that come with chasing the heights of the world's deadliest peak. Babu Chiri Sherpa's story, much like the peaks he conquered, is marked by extraordinary heights and a tragic fall. Born in Nepal in 1965, Babu began his journey as a trekking porter at the age of 15, carrying heavy loads through the Himalayan terrain for meager pay. But even in the face of hardship, his determination to rise above his circumstances never wavered. Over the years, he worked tirelessly, gradually ascending the ranks in the mountaineering world. At 23, he achieved his breakthrough, joining an expedition to Kangchenjunga, the world's third highest peak. Defying expectations, Babu reached the summit without supplemental oxygen while assisting his team, a remarkable feat that showcased his strength and resilience. What followed was a career that cemented Babu's legacy as one of the greatest Sherpa mountaineers in history. Among his many accomplishments was spending an unprecedented 21 hours atop Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, an achievement unmatched to this day. He also shattered speed records, summiting Everest in just 16 hours and 56 minutes, a record later broken but no less impressive in its time. Over his career, Babu reached the summit of Everest 10 times, an achievement few could match. Yet, Babu's story extended beyond the icy slopes of the Himalayas. He was not just a climber but also a humanitarian and environmentalist. Driven by his commitment to his community, he worked to establish a school in his hometown, providing opportunities for future generations. His contributions were honored by the Nepalese government, which inaugurated the Babu Chiri Memorial Museum in Kathmandu and erected a statue in his honor. In 2001, Babu embarked on what would tragically be his final expedition to Everest. For a climber of his caliber, the journey was expected to be routine. By then, he had already conquered the mountain 10 times, earning a reputation as one of the most accomplished Sherpas of his time. The expedition began in early April, with Babu and his team acclimatizing at base camp. By May 19th, they had reached Camp 2, positioned at 6,400 meters, waiting for clear weather to attempt the summit. But on that fateful afternoon, while the team rested, Babu ventured out onto the glacier to take photographs. The snow concealed a narrow crevasse, and in a split second, he fell through. When the team realized he was missing, a search party was quickly assembled. Following footprints in the snow, they located a small hole where Babu had fallen. Despite the treacherous conditions, an Argentinian climber, Willy Benegas, took the lead, descending into the crevasse in freezing darkness. By morning, Benegas, assisted by another Sherpa, worked tirelessly to recover Babu's body. Within the confines of the 80-centimeter-wide crevasse, they painstakingly removed ice, finally securing the body to a rope. Over the next 8 hours, nearly 60 Sherpas collaborated to carry Babu's body down the mountain, navigating the perilous icefall and countless crevasses to bring him back to base camp. Babu's death shocked Nepal and the global climbing community. He left behind his wife and 6 daughters, whose grief was immeasurable. In recognition of his legacy, the Nepalese royal family promised to provide his daughters with free education at one of the nation's most prestigious schools. Babu Chiri Sherpa's life was one of resilience, courage, and generosity. He climbed mountains not just for personal glory, but also to uplift his community and inspire others. His tragic death serves as a poignant reminder of the risks inherent in chasing greatness. Yet, his legacy endures, both in the history of mountaineering and in the lives of those he touched. For those who hear his story, Babu remains a symbol of determination, a man who reached unimaginable heights, but whose heart never left the ground. In 1967, John Ogden and 5 of his friends embarked on an ambitious caving expedition into an unmapped section of England's Mossdale Caverns. The group had spent hours navigating the dark, winding passages, crawling and climbing deeper into the earth, eager to explore an untouched world few had ever seen. But deep in the labyrinth of rock, they were unaware of the impending danger lurking above them. As the hours passed, the sky outside began to shift, and a heavy rainstorm set in. At first, it seemed like any typical downpour, but soon the storm became more than just a passing weather event. The creek outside the cave began to swell, rising rapidly with the relentless rain. As the water level continued to climb, it became clear that the situation was turning catastrophic. Without warning, the entrance to the cave was buried beneath a rising lake, and the floodwater came rushing in through every passage and tunnel. While the group crawled through a narrow, confined tunnel, they suddenly heard the unmistakable rumble of water surging toward them. The sound grew louder, and the water came rushing in with terrifying speed. Within moments, the creek that had once been a harmless trickle transformed into a violent torrent. It rushed in quickly, first rising up over their feet, and then climbing to their necks, trapping the group in the increasingly perilous depths of the cave. With the water rising fast, their only hope of survival was a small crack in the rocks up ahead, a narrow fissure that could provide a small pocket of air. Desperate and struggling against the flood, Ogden managed to force his way through the crack, pulling his body upward as the water surged around him. He managed to push himself to the top of the narrow crevice, where he found a tiny pocket of air, just enough to keep his head above the water. But the crevice was too tight for anyone else to join him. The rest of the group, still trapped below, was quickly consumed by the rising water. Ogden was left alone, his body wedged in the small crack, struggling to stay above the surging flood. From his small refuge, he could hear the water swarming around him, helplessly knowing that his friends had perished in the rushing torrent. The hours stretched on, and Ogden clung to his fragile hope of rescue. The cold, suffocating darkness of the cave surrounded him as the floodwater continued to rise. There was no way for him to escape the narrow prison where he was trapped. The days passed, and Ogden remained stuck in the crevice, desperate for air, slowly weakening from exhaustion and the overwhelming sense of isolation. His cries for help went unanswered, and with each passing moment, the chances of survival seemed more and more distant. By the time the rescuers finally arrived and located him, it was too late. Ogden had succumbed to the cold, unable to hold on any longer. His lifeless body remained wedged in the narrow space, still trapped in that unforgiving passage, struggling for a final breath of air that would never come. The search for John Ogden and his friends, which had started as a hopeful attempt to rescue them, ended in tragedy. The bodies of all 6 individuals were eventually recovered, but their lives had been claimed by the violent floodwaters that had overtaken them. The disaster at Mossdale Caverns remains one of the most haunting cave tragedies in history. In the unforgiving heights of Mount Everest, where the air is thin and the cold is merciless, Francis Arsentiev's final moments unfolded in a way both haunting and unforgettable. Her story is one of unrelenting ambition, breathtaking bravery, and a tragic end that immortalized her as Everest's Sleeping Beauty. Born on January 18, 1958 in Honolulu, Hawaii, Frances DiStefano Arcentiev was destined for adventure. From an early age, she possessed a fierce determination and insatiable thirst for challenge. Her ultimate goal, to stand atop the world's highest peak without supplemental oxygen. In 1998, she set out to make history as the first American woman to achieve this feat. But Everest is merciless. The climb demands everything from those who dare to challenge it. Oxygen levels plummet, temperatures drop to lethal lows, and even the strongest bodies begin to shut down. For Frances, the cost of her dream was steep. Despite overwhelming exhaustion, the brutal separation from her husband, and the sheer mental and physical toll of the climb, she pressed on. Against all odds, she reached the summit, but the true battle had only just begun. The descent, always more treacherous than the climb, became her undoing. Somewhere along the way, she became disoriented. Her body, battered by extreme cold and deprivation, began to fail her. Alone and vulnerable in Everest's infamous death zone, she slipped into the slow, agonizing grip of hypothermia. As her core temperature dropped, she lost cognitive function. The world around her faded into a blur. Two climbers, British mountaineer Ian Woodall and South African Cathy O'Dowd, encountered Frances on their way up. She was still alive, but barely. Her body frozen, her voice weak, helpless against the mountain's brutal conditions. They tried to aid her, but ultimately had to make the impossible decision: save themselves or perish alongside her. The guilt of leaving Frances behind would haunt them forever. For nearly a decade, her body remained on Everest, a silent, snow-covered figure resting against the icy slopes. When climbers passed by, they described her appearance as eerily serene, her face pale, her features untouched by the brutality of the mountain. She looked as though she were merely sleeping, earning her the heartbreaking moniker, the Sleeping Beauty of Everest. But her story did not end there. In 2007, haunted by the memory of the woman they could not save, Ian Woodall and a team returned to the mountain. This time, their mission was not to conquer Everest, but to bring peace to those it had claimed. The operation, known as the Tao of Everest, sought to retrieve Frances' body and give her the dignity in death she had been denied. It was a symbolic act of justice, not just for her, but for others whose remains had become grim landmarks on the mountain. Among them, the infamous Green Boots and David Sharp. Frances' body was finally moved from its exposed position, allowing her to rest beyond the reach of passing climbers. The mission was hailed as a heroic gesture, an effort to honor those who had given everything to Everest. Her story remains one of both triumph and tragedy. She reached the top of the world, but the mountain refused to let her go. Her legacy, however, endures, not just as a cautionary tale of Everest's dangers, but as a testament to the human spirit's relentless pursuit of greatness. The Sleeping Beauty of Everest will never be forgotten. On a fateful night in May 2006, the icy slopes of Mount Everest became the scene of a tragedy that would shake the climbing community and redefine the ethics of high-altitude mountaineering. David Sharp, an experienced British climber, lay dying near the summit. As dozens of climbers passed him by, their focus fixed on their own ambitions. His lonely demise raised troubling questions about morality, survival, and the cost of achieving greatness in one of the world's harshest environments. David Sharp's life began far from the frozen peaks of the Himalayas. Born and raised in Hertfordshire, England, he followed a conventional path through education, earning a master's degree in engineering from the University of Nottingham and embarking on a promising career with a defense contractor. Yet, beneath this structured life, Sharp harbored a deep love for adventure. His passion for mountaineering emerged through gradual ascents of smaller peaks before he took on greater challenges, including the Matterhorn in Switzerland and Kilimanjaro in Africa. Over time, his focus shifted to the towering giants of the Himalayas, driven by an uncompromising spirit and a belief in pure, self-reliant climbing. Sharp's climbing philosophy reflected a purist's view of the sport. He rejected the reliance on supplemental oxygen and large expedition teams, viewing these as dilutions of the authentic climbing experience. For him, the true test of human endurance was in confronting nature on its own terms. In 2002, Sharp successfully climbed Cho Oyu, the world's sixth highest peak, without bottled oxygen, earning admiration for his strength and resilience. This feat bolstered his confidence and set the stage for his ultimate goal, a solo ascent of Mount Everest. By 2006, Sharp was determined to conquer Everest, but he approached the challenge with minimal support. He enlisted the Nepal-based agency Asia Trekking for their basic service package, which provided only logistical aid up to advanced base camp, a permit, and limited oxygen supplies. This austere approach left him vulnerable, but Sharp embraced the risk, telling others, "If I don't do it this time, I'm not coming back." On May 13th, Sharp began his final ascent from the North Pole. The details of his climb remain shrouded in mystery. Without a radio or satellite phone, he left no record of his progress, and whether he reached the summit is unknown. Some climbers reported seeing a figure resembling Sharp near the summit that day, leading to speculation that he may have succeeded or come heartbreakingly close before trouble struck on his descent. Exhausted and disoriented, Sharp sought shelter in Green Boots Cave, a rocky alcove infamous for housing the body of Sawang Paljor, a climber who perished there in 1996. At an altitude of over 8,500 meters, the cave sits in Everest's death zone, where oxygen levels are perilously low and temperatures can drop to lethal levels. Sharp was spotted by multiple climbers as he sat in the cave, struggling to survive in the thin air. Turkish climbers were among the first to encounter Sharp early on May 15th. Though alive, he was gravely weakened, suffering from frostbite and severe oxygen depletion. They attempted to help, but, limited by their own resources, could do little before continuing their descent. Later, a commercial expedition led by Russell Bryce passed by. Among them was double amputee climber Mark Inglis, who noted Sharp's deteriorating condition but deemed him beyond saving. With their own safety and objectives in mind, the team moved on. As Sharp's condition worsened, a Sherpa who approached him heard his final words, "My name is David Sharp. I'm with Asian Trekking, and I just want to sleep." He succumbed soon after, becoming one of Everest's many victims. At just 34 years old, Sharp's life ended in solitude on the icy slopes he had worked so hard to conquer. Sharp's body remained in Green Boots Cave for a year before Sherpas respectfully relocated it to a nearby cliff, letting it fall to the north face. His death sparked an outcry within the global climbing community, igniting debates about the ethical responsibilities of climbers. Many criticized the individuals who passed him without offering aid, while others pointed to the near-impossible challenges of rescue at such altitudes. Sharp's minimalist approach, lack of a support team, and limited oxygen were also seen as contributing factors to his fate. The story of David Sharp is a reminder of the dangers of Everest and the harsh realities of mountaineering at extreme altitudes. It exposed the thin line between triumph and tragedy, forcing climbers to confront the moral complexities of their pursuit. While Sharp's death describes the risks of solo expeditions, it's also an ode to the human spirit's unyielding desire to reach the top, even when the cost is everything. John Jones was an avid spelunker, an experienced cave explorer with a deep love for the activity. He had spent years exploring caves, and to him it was more than just a hobby, it was a passion. He knew the risks, but also cherished the sense of adventure that came with delving into the unknown underground world. On November 24, 2009, John, along with a group of 10 friends, embarked on what seemed like just another adventure in Nutty Putty Cave, located around 80 miles south of Salt Lake City, Utah. What began as a thrilling exploration soon became a nightmare that would claim his life. Nutty Putty Cave, known for its narrow passages and winding tunnels, was a place that attracted many adventurers who sought to test their skills. That day, John and his group were well equipped and experienced, but even the most seasoned explorers can encounter unforeseen dangers in such environments. While in the cave, John entered an area known as Bob's Push, a particularly tight L-shaped passage located about 150 feet beneath the surface. The passage was just 18 inches wide and 10 inches high, extremely narrow, even for an experienced spelunker like John. Unfortunately, as John maneuvered through the passage, the positioning of the rocks trapped him, pinning him in place and leaving him stuck in a precarious position. John's brother, Josh, was the first to find him in that terrifying moment. As soon as Josh realized the gravity of the situation, he desperately tried to pull his brother out, attempting to free him from the tight spot. But despite his best efforts, Josh could only shift John slightly, and as soon as he let go, John slid back down, wedged even deeper into the crevice. John's right hand was pinned, and his left arm was awkwardly forced behind him. Though his feet and ankles were free, gravity worked against him, keeping him trapped in that narrow space. In those terrifying moments, the brothers turned to each other, praying for a miracle before Josh hurriedly made his way back to the cave entrance to get help. Josh rushed to the surface where he called emergency responders as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, a friend stayed behind with John, offering what little comfort they could while they waited for rescue teams to arrive. Within hours, a search and rescue team was on the scene. The team quickly got to work, carefully formulating a plan to save John. Time was of the essence, and they knew they had to act fast. They began by attempting to drill away at the surrounding rocks in an effort to widen the passage and free John. But the task proved more difficult than anticipated. The rock was incredibly tough, and John's position made drilling slow and painstaking. For hours, the rescue team chipped away at the stone, but progress was minimal. They had only managed to remove a few inches of rock. The team quickly realized that they needed to consider a different approach. Next, the rescuers turned to a pulley system in an attempt to pull John free from the crevice. They set up the ropes and began pulling with all their might, hoping to extract him. A team of 8 rescuers worked together, tugging on the rope in unison, but disaster struck when the rope snapped, sending John sliding even further into the crevice. His body became wedged deeper into the passage, and the rescuers quickly realized they were in a race against time to get him out before it was too late. As the hours passed, John's condition began to deteriorate. His breathing became shallow, and he was unable to respond to the rescuers' calls. His once steady movements were replaced by an eerie silence that signaled the inevitable. The rescue team worked tirelessly, continuing their efforts to free him, but it soon became clear that they were facing an insurmountable challenge. With each failed attempt to extract him, the situation grew more dire. John's brother Josh, along with the other volunteers and rescuers, never gave up hope, but as time passed, the weight of the reality began to sink in. By midnight on November 25, 2009, after 27 hours of intense efforts by the search and rescue team, John was pronounced dead. His body had been trapped for so long that the efforts to extract him had ultimately come too late. The rescue mission had been grueling, and the team's collective exhaustion was evident. One of the volunteers, a man who had been involved in search and rescue work for 29 years, described the mission as the hardest he had ever been a part of. Despite their dedication, the rescuers had been unable to overcome the unforgiving nature of the cave and the challenges of the terrain. John's death at Nutty Putty Cave was a reminder of the inherent dangers of spelunking and cave exploration. Despite his extensive experience, John was unable to escape the tight confines of the cave, a situation made even more tragic by the fact that so many tried but ultimately failed to save him. On a warm summer night in 1974, Disneyland, the so-called happiest place on Earth, became the site of an unthinkable tragedy. An 18-year-old employee named Deborah Gale Stone was killed in a horrifying accident at the America Sings attraction, a newly opened musical show celebrating American history. What should have been just another night of joyful performances ended in disaster, forever altering the way amusement park safety was handled. The evening of July 8th had begun like any other for Deborah. A recent high school graduate from Santa Ana, California, she had taken a summer job at Disneyland, thrilled to be working in a place filled with magic and wonder. Her role as a hostess for America Sings was simple but essential, greeting guests as they settled into the rotating theater. America Sings had only been open for a little over a week, having debuted on June 29th as a replacement for the Carousel of Progress. The attraction featured an outer ring of 6 seating areas that rotated around a stationary core, moving audiences from scene to scene as animatronic figures performed patriotic songs. The concept was innovative, but hidden within its moving parts was a lethal design flaw. That night, Deborah took her position beside the stage, microphone in hand, welcoming guests as the theater rotated into place. Then, something went terribly wrong. At approximately 11 p.m., as the audience from one cycle exited and the theater reset for the next group, Deborah somehow found herself caught in the narrow space between the rotating wall and the stationary stage. A chilling scream cut through the music and chatter of the park. In the adjacent theater, a man named Daniel Robeson, a 33-year-old Air Force serviceman visiting with his family, witnessed a horrifying sight. From his seat in the front row, he caught a glimpse of what he initially thought was a child being pulled into the gap between the walls. In a moment of confusion and terror, he realized the truth. It was Deborah. The rotation of the theater stopped, but it was too late. Deborah had been crushed between the walls, trapped in a deadly space no one had foreseen as a potential hazard. The accident sent shockwaves through Disneyland. The Los Angeles Times reported on July 10th that Deborah died at 11 p.m. during a 45-second interval when the audience had left her theater and it was moving into position to start a new cycle. It was the first employee fatality in Disneyland's 19-year history. Though there had been previous guest deaths at the park, this was the first time an attraction had taken the life of a cast member. America Sings was shut down immediately following the tragedy, remaining closed for 2 days while engineers worked frantically to improve its safety features. A warning light was installed to alert operators if anyone stepped too close to the dangerous gap. Later, additional barriers were put in place to prevent another catastrophe. For many, the accident exposed a sobering truth. Even in a place built for joy and wonder, hidden dangers could lurk behind the scenes. Deborah's death served as a reminder that innovation and spectacle must always be balanced with caution and safety. Though America Sings continued to operate until 1988 before being replaced by Star Tours, the memory of that fateful night never truly faded. For those who remember, Deborah Gale Stone's story remains a haunting chapter in Disneyland's history. A young woman full of promise, lost to a tragedy that could have been prevented. In 1974, renowned French mountaineer Gérard Devoiseux set his sights on the formidable west ridge of Mount Everest, one of the most treacherous routes to the summit. Known for its rugged terrain, unpredictable weather, and unparalleled difficulty, the West Ridge had long challenged even the most skilled climbers. Devoiseux, celebrated for his remarkable climbing expertise, joined a team of 19 climbers and Sherpas on this daring expedition. The group arrived at the base of the mountain in late August, fully aware of the risks they faced. The monsoon season was ending, but the weather remained highly unstable, turning their venture into a calculated gamble where every step could tip the balance between triumph and disaster. Undeterred by the looming threat of volatile conditions, the team pressed forward, setting up a series of high-altitude camps along the route. Their determination and camaraderie helped them endure the challenges posed by the West Ridge. Spirits remained high as they acclimatized and prepared for their final push toward the summit. However, the mountain's unpredictable nature soon revealed its devastating power. On the night of September 9th, catastrophe struck with unrelenting force. As the climbers rested in their tents, a massive avalanche thundered down the slopes, engulfing the camps with snow and ice. The sheer force of the avalanche was overwhelming, burying Devoiseux and 5 Sherpas beneath its crushing weight. Those who survived scrambled to search for their teammates, digging frantically through the debris in the hope of finding survivors. However, the destruction was too extensive, and their efforts proved futile. Neither Devoiseux nor the Sherpas were ever recovered from the icy depths. The tragedy left the climbing community in a state of mourning, leaving survivors and loved ones devastated by the loss. The West Ridge, already infamous for its perils, became a haunting symbol of nature's unyielding power and the fragility of human ambition. The loss of 6 lives in a single night reminded us all the extreme risks associated with high-altitude mountaineering, where the line between success and catastrophe is perilously thin. In the aftermath of the disaster, climbers avoided the West Ridge for the next 5 years. Its reputation as a deadly route solidified. The avalanche became a cautionary tale, reminding us the importance of respecting the mountain's unpredictability and sheer force. It also shed light on the invaluable contributions and sacrifices of Sherpas, whose courage and expertise are often overlooked in the narratives of climbing achievements. Gérard de Vouassoux' legacy, along with that of the Sherpas who perished alongside him, endures as a testament to the spirit of exploration and the deep bonds forged in the face of danger. Their story, though marked by heartbreak, stands as the example of the resilience and camaraderie that define the climbing community. For those who venture onto the West Ridge today, the memory of that fateful expedition serves as both a sobering warning and an enduring inspiration, a call to approach the mountain with humility, respect, and unwavering caution. Peter Verhulsel was no stranger to risk. In 1984, the seasoned cave diver and adventurer joined a group of friends for an expedition into the famous Sterkfontein Caves in South Africa. With a sense of curiosity that always pushed him to explore deeper, Peter chose to ignore safety protocols and venture beyond the mapped paths, seeking out new, uncharted territories within the dark, winding tunnels. For Peter, the call of the unknown was irresistible, and he was determined to discover every secret the caves held. But on his third journey into these untrodden paths, things would take a tragic turn. As Peter swam through the maze of narrow passages, he soon realized that he was no longer able to find his way back. The darkness closed in around him, and the familiar sounds of his friends faded into silence. In that moment, Peter knew that he was lost, trapped deep within the cave system with no clear exit in sight. Panic crept in, but Peter tried to stay calm. The only thing he could do was continue to move forward, hoping for some sign of a way out. That's when he found a small island at the end of a distant tunnel. It wasn't much, just a tiny patch of rock that emerged from the water, but it offered him a temporary sanctuary. Climbing onto the island, Peter took a moment to catch his breath and assess his situation. His oxygen supply was dangerously low, and with no way to know how much longer he had before it ran out, he knew he had to conserve it. The water surrounding him was dark and cold, and his prospects for escape grew increasingly grim. Peter tried to summon the energy to keep searching for an exit, but with his remaining oxygen, he understood that his best chance was to wait for help. As time passed, though, there was no sign of rescue. Hours turned into a haunting silence, and despite his best efforts to remain composed, Peter's body grew weaker. Exhausted from the effort and uncertainty, he succumbed to sleep, hoping that when he woke, rescuers would be there. But when Peter awoke, he found himself still alone, trapped in the cold, inky darkness of the cave. There was no food, no light, and no sound of anyone coming to his aid. Desperation began to set in as Peter faced the harsh reality of his situation. Still, he waited. Days passed, and with each one his strength waned further. Time felt like it had stopped, and Peter was forced to endure the suffocating isolation as he waited for someone, anyone, to find him. Meanwhile, his friends and loved ones, desperate to find him, launched an extensive search operation. The search for Peter lasted 6 long weeks. Rescuers combed the cave system relentlessly, hoping to find any sign of Peter, but the vast network of tunnels and the sheer unpredictability of the underground environment made it a nearly impossible task. Despite their best efforts, Peter remained elusive, his chances of survival growing slimmer with each passing day. Finally, when the rescuers were able to locate Peter, the reality of his fate was painfully clear. His body, found in the same cavern where he had last sought refuge, was nothing more than a skeletal remains. It was clear that he had succumbed to the harsh conditions of the cave, likely dying from starvation and the effects of prolonged exposure without food or water. In the final moments of his life, Peter left behind a heartbreaking message scrawled in the sand for his wife, Cheryl, and his mother. It read simply, "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." It was a sad and final act of love that would forever be etched in the memories of those who loved him. Peter's death in Sterkfontein Caves reminds us of risks that come with pushing the boundaries of exploration. His story highlights both the allure and danger of venturing into unknown, uncharted places, where the line between adventure and tragedy can quickly become blurred. On a frigid November night in 1983, off the coast of Norway, an ordinary shift for a group of deep-sea saturation divers turned into an unimaginable nightmare. The Byford Dolphin, a semi-submersible oil rig operating in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, became the site of one of the most horrifying decompression accidents in history. What should have been a routine operation ended in devastation, leaving 4 divers and a support crew member dead in a manner so gruesome that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. Saturation diving is an essential but dangerous profession. Working at extreme depths for extended periods requires divers to acclimate to high-pressure environments. To minimize the risk of decompression sickness, also known as the bends, divers live for weeks in pressurized chambers, breathing a carefully controlled mixture of helium and oxygen. This setup allows them to work efficiently without the need for prolonged decompression after each dive. Instead of ascending slowly after each shift, they remain under constant pressure until their assignment is complete, at which point they undergo a carefully monitored, gradual decompression process. On the night of November 5th, a team of divers had just completed their shift and were returning from the depths in a diving bell, a small pressurized chamber designed to transfer them safely between the underwater worksite and the main saturation chambers on the rig. Standard procedure dictated that once the diving bell was attached to the trunk leading to the saturation chambers, the divers inside would secure the hatch, isolating the bell. Only then would the trunk be slowly depressurized before detaching the bell from the system. But something went terribly wrong. Whether due to a moment of fatigue, a lapse in communication, or equipment failure, one of the tenders outside the chamber released the clamp, securing the diving bell too soon, before the trunk had been depressurized. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The system, which had been pressurized to 9 atmospheres, roughly 90 meters, 300 feet below sea level, was suddenly exposed to the normal atmospheric pressure of the rig above. The result was an explosive decompression event so violent that it instantly killed the diver who had released the clamp, launching the diving bell away from the rig with tremendous force. Inside the chambers, the 4 divers never had a chance. The rapid decompression caused the gases dissolved in their blood to expand with horrifying speed, leading to massive internal hemorrhaging. In an instant, their tissues ruptured, their blood foamed, and fat cells liquefied. Death came swiftly, but in a manner so gruesome it defied comprehension. One of the divers, closest to the opening where the decompression occurred, suffered a fate even more horrific. The pressure differential sucked his entire body through an opening only 60 centimeters, 24 inches wide. What was left of him was found in multiple locations across the rig, collected in separate bags, his remains scattered by the sheer force of the explosion. A piece of his body was discovered 10 meters, 33 feet away. The autopsy report, later released in chilling detail, painted a grim picture. The top of the victim's skull and brain were missing. His facial skin was completely separated from the bones, and most of his internal organs had been forcibly ejected from his body. His spine and ribs had been shattered beyond recognition. Even his liver, remarkably intact, was found lying on the rig's deck as though it had been surgically removed. The sheer brutality of the accident was enough to shake the diving community to the core. The families of the deceased spent over 2 decades fighting for justice, demanding an investigation into the failures that led to such a horrifying disaster. After 26 years, an official report concluded that serious flaws in the Byford Dolphins' equipment and procedures were to blame, finally bringing some measure of accountability. Though safety protocols were improved in the years following the tragedy, the events of that night remain a haunting proof of the deadly risks faced by deep-sea divers. For those who step into the abyss, the ocean is an unforgiving mistress. One mistake, one oversight, can unleash consequences too horrific to imagine. In 1924, George Mallory, 37, and Andrew Sandy Irvine, 22, embarked on a British expedition with the ambitious goal of becoming the first to conquer Mount Everest. At a time when Nepal was closed to foreigners, the team approached the mountain from its Tibetan north side, a route as daunting as it was remote. The expedition was a testament to human determination and the spirit of adventure, but it would ultimately become one of mountaineering's most enduring mysteries. Mallory and Irvine began their summit push on June 6th, setting out from the North Col at an altitude of 7,000 meters, 22,966 feet. Accompanied by Tibetan helpers, they made their way toward Everest's unforgiving upper slopes. By the following day, the pair had reached their final high camp at approximately 8,200 meters, where the Tibetan porters turned back. Before parting ways, Mallory handed a note to one of the porters, addressed to fellow expedition member Noel Odell. In it, Mallory outlined where he expected Odell might spot them the next day and at what time. On June 8th, the weather briefly offered a break from the relentless cloud cover, and Odell caught a fleeting glimpse of two figures, tiny moving dots, on a rock step along the northeast ridge. It was the last known sighting of Mallory and Irvine. After that moment, the pair vanished into Everest's icy expanse, their fate shrouded in mystery. Efforts to search for the missing climbers were hindered by the harsh conditions. Odell ascended to the high camp again, pushing beyond it in a desperate attempt to locate his teammates. However, a violent storm swept through the mountain, forcing him to retreat. The onset of monsoon conditions made any further search impossible. Heartbroken and with no alternatives, expedition leader Edward Norton sent a telegram to the Times in London. Mallory and Irvine killed in last attempt. It was a somber conclusion to an expedition that had come tantalizingly close to history. Norton himself had reached an altitude of 8,570 meters without bottled oxygen during the expedition, a record for unassisted climbing on Everest that stood until 1978. That year, Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler achieved the first ascent of Everest without supplemental oxygen, finally surpassing Norton's remarkable feat. Decades passed, and the mystery of Mallory and Irvine's disappearance continued to haunt the climbing community. In 1933, another British Everest expedition found Irvine's ice axe at an altitude of 8,460 meters, a chilling reminder of the duo's ill-fated attempt. Over the years, sporadic reports from climbers hinted at the discovery of an old corpse between 8,100 and 8,500 meters, but none of these sightings could be verified. The breakthrough came on May 1, 1999, when American climber Conrad Anker, part of an international search team, stumbled upon Mallory's body. Found at an altitude of 8,159 meters, Mallory's remains were frozen in rubble, his broken leg and visible head injuries evidence of a catastrophic fall. Despite this discovery, Irvine's body remains missing, leaving a crucial piece of the puzzle unresolved. Among the items missing from Mallory's body was a small Kodak camera. If recovered, the camera could potentially hold photographic evidence that Mallory and Irvine reached the summit, solving the question that has lingered for nearly a century. Did they achieve the first successful ascent of Everest before perishing on their descent? The tale of Mallory and Irvine endures as a special chapter in the history of exploration. Their courage and ambition pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible at the time, inspiring generations of climbers who followed. While their ultimate fate remains clouded by uncertainty, their story proves the unforgiving nature of the world's highest peaks and the enduring human desire to reach for the unknown.